Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Noelia Jr. I'm the program assistant for the Office for Victim Advocacy and Violence Prevention, other known as OVAP. And today we have Amanda Quintanilla from the UTRGV Police Department Victim Services, and I'll hand it off to her.
All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a special guest from the Children's Advocacy Center, Ms. Rosita Resmundo, and the title for today is Children Need Advocates Too. Rosita, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. So yes, I work with the Children's Advocacy Center of Hidalgo and Stark counties. And my role at the CAC is I've worked as a forensic interviewer, and most recently, I'm a coordinator for services and projects at the CAC.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we begin, we're going to move over to our next slide. I'm going to go over the trigger warning, the disclaimer. The content of this presentation and discussion could be troubling, especially for survivors of violence, victimization, or harassment. So please feel free to leave. If the discussion triggers an upsetting response, please treat the session as a safe space, respect the boundaries of others, especially if their views or experiences are clearly troubling to them. Okay. Again, thank you all for joining us. We're going to be kicking off April in this last week right here because Child Abuse Awareness Month is for April. So we thank you for joining us. And today, these are our 3 objectives. We are going to gain an understanding of the Children's Advocacy Center, identify those who can utilize the center, and also identify collaborators and resources in our community. With that being said, let's begin. So, Ms. Rosita, what is the Children's Advocacy Center?
Awesome. All right, guys. So the Children's Advocacy Center is a place where children can come tell their story. It's a safe place when abuse has occurred. And so our center, also known as the Children's Advocacy Center of Hidalgo and Stark County, but for short, we call it the CAC, is part of one of 71 centers in the state of Texas that are part of this bigger umbrella of children's advocacy centers that are nationwide. So our CAC, we have 3 locations, one in Edinburg, one in Mission, and one in Roma. And our first one was established in Edinburg in 2000 after the tragic loss of a 2-year-old that had resulted the death because of abuse. So we provide a place, like I said, where kiddos can come in and talk about what happened and families can feel safe.
All right. Now, I hear sometimes Children's Advocacy Center, CAC, but I also heard it be called by the name of Estrella's House. Can you tell us a little bit more about that so that you can clear up any misunderstandings of the name?
Absolutely, yeah. So back in 2000, we talked a little bit already about the 2-year-old who lost her life. And so her name was Estrella. So for a very, very long time, our center was referred to as Estrellita's House. And that was a fun name that kiddos felt really comfortable because they had a fun name attached to it. As we grew more and more, and then we also expanded our services to Stark County, we changed our name to the Children's Advocacy Center of Hidalgo and Stark counties.
So we can call it CAC, Estrella's House, and most people in your field would know what we're talking about, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay, so pandemic, we can't have a conversation without, unfortunately, bringing up the pandemic. Due to it, I would imagine things are different now with the way that things are run. How have you all seen your cases? Are your numbers, have they increased? Have they decreased? What about the procedures that you all are doing now to see the kiddos?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a great question now. Even as early as last year in March, we were faced with some very challenging situations. So the work that we do in Hidalgo and Stark County is that work of essential personnel. For example, like doctors and nurses, we can't just say we're going to close our doors and we're not going to respond to cases that we need to see and have that response needed with law enforcement and child protective services. So we moved pretty quickly at the beginning of the pandemic to ensure that we remained open. Obviously, with our staff, PPE was something that we were able to secure very, very quickly. And then we were able to keep, we have 3 locations. So previously to the pandemic, we might have quite a few families in the building at one time. We had to change some things here and there to kind of have that 6 feet of social distancing and making sure that the families that were coming in, we could, respond to their needs. We are, so right now nationally, there's what we call the perfect storm. Every state is seeing this. We're seeing it in our local communities where the reports of child abuse are actually lower. And there's a couple reasons for that. Because one being that the pandemic, children are not going to go to school. They're not, there anymore. So our number one reporters, we know that come from teachers and counselors and places like that, children feel safe. So that being said, when kiddos are not going to school, then reports are going down. However, because kiddos are staying home and it's that perfect storm, where now the perpetrator, the person that's causing harm to that child, may have unsupervised access to the child for a long period of time. And so some of the cases that we are seeing, throughout the year are very extreme cases of abuse. That maybe it takes a doctor's visit or an emergency visit for us to actually know that abuse is occurring.
What's going on? Wow.
Yeah.
My goodness. What are the ages of the victims that you see there at the CAC?
Yeah, so our target, the kiddos, the age that we kind of look at, we work with children from all the way down as little as 2 years to 17 years of age. We say that with some caution, because although that's our average of kiddos that we see, sometimes we will see little ones under the age of 2 for a medical exam. And there are situations sometimes that abuse may have occurred when the person was a young child, but they're just kind of in that 18, 19-year-old kind of age bracket, or adults with impairments, with special needs or developmental delays. So we may also see that population as well.
Wow. What would be considered child abuse that somebody would go to your facility?
Yeah, so our criteria, we call that our criteria, the cases that we see is basically any maltreatment of a child. And maltreatment could be physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, physical neglect, emotional abuse. There's a lot of abuse that goes on. So our referral process comes in from, for example, you're a neighbor and you see something that happened to a child and you want to report it. So you call the statewide intake, and that's a hotline with the state of Texas that's put together, and we'll provide that here in just a little bit. But you'll call that number, or you call 911, or you file a police report. That's another way that you can report. And the CEC receives that report of those allegations of abuse of a child at the same time as your local police department does, and your child protective services folks as well. So when that report comes in, there's allegations in the report that tells, so it could be very detailed, and sometimes we don't have a lot of information. And so we get together, and then that's that respond that we talk about. It's called the multidisciplinary team respond. So it's not just one agency responding to child abuse reports. It's a group of people, agencies in the community, to ensure that, we're all collaboratively working on these cases.
And so then those agencies working together would be the law enforcement, child protective services, and yourself, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So the law requires that they are also part of this. Now, sometimes CPS may not be involved just because it doesn't meet their requirement to be involved, or vice versa. It doesn't meet criminal intent with the allegations that's in there. So it can be either or, but more than likely, we will always need law enforcement or CPS are going to be involved. And as well, sometimes, the district attorney's office from Hidalgo County or Starr County can also be involved.
Right. Okay, that's true. What, it's just a hard question to ask, but what abuse do you all see most there in the center?
Actually, that's a great question, and one that we always like to answer. Yes, unfortunately, sexual abuse is one of the allegations or reports that are reported more so in Hidalgo County and Starr County.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can you, these are all hard questions, this is a very serious topic and we need to, bring light to it. Can you walk us through the process or the steps of the case when somebody gets to your office, your facility? What's the process? Who do they speak with? How the interview process, just a little bit of everything so we can get a better understanding.
Absolutely. I think that's, something that kind of can put some, visual for people to understand what it looks like. So we talked a little bit about that report when it comes in. And so we have about 40 some staff members at our CAC just working 24/7 around the clock and making sure we provide the services very quickly. And there are some timelines with CPS, and we want to make sure the child is safe and that the child is not left in a situation where it's not safe. So we move very, very, very quickly. It could be at 3 o'clock in the morning or at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. But when we do make connection with CPS and law enforcement and we coordinate those services, the child is going to be brought into the CAC. And there's a couple reasons for that. The services that we're going to respond to are very quickly and very important. One of them being a forensic interview. A forensic interview is a way in which we obtain a statement from a child from them. They provide us that narrative in a forensic way, meaning that it's a legally sound method to obtain a statement from a child. So that forensic interview, not all the times, but it's usually the first step. So the child comes into the CAC with a protective caregiver, and we show the child the room where they're going to be talked to and who they're going to talk to. And so these are two rooms that are happening that we have in the forensic interview wing. One is a monitor room with CPS and law enforcement are going to be able to sit in and also, listen and see what's being asked of the child when the child is, providing the information. And then we actually have the forensic interview room, which is where, like myself as a forensic interviewer, I would be sitting down with the child, pretty close proximity. And we explain to the child what the room is like. If they have any questions, they have the ability to ask. And then what we do is we conduct what we call a semi-structured narrative process interview with that child that basically takes them through myself, building rapport with the child, understanding that the child can understand what I'm asking them, that they understand what it is to tell the truth. And so we take them through that, and then they provide us the details of what they, the abuse that they occurred, if any abuse occurred. Sometimes, they're there and, they're not going to tell us, or maybe something didn't happen, but we let the child provide that information to us. So after the forensic interview, sometimes these are very difficult conversations with children.
Of course.
Some very difficult things that have happened to these little guys. So we do have we call them a clinical family advocate, which is a person that will debrief the child after the interview. Because if something got triggered, just kind of like the disclaimer you had at the beginning of this presentation or this interview, that we want to make sure that when the child returns back to school or home, that the child is in a safe place, not only with mental health, that they're not having any suicide ideations or anything like that, that we return them into a state where it's healthy. So once they talk to that person, in kind of behind the scenes, we have family advocates that are going to be working with the family pretty closely. So they have, if a crime has been committed, let's say in Edinburgh, that's a crime, the victim's crimes, folks will work really closely with this family to fill out applications for the crimes victim application. Sometimes families have to move because the incident might have occurred in a place that triggers that child to remember what happened all the time. So we work very closely with the family, and not just at the beginning, that first day, but throughout the entire process in which this takes, which could be a couple years. And the other piece that we work on towards with the family and the victims is that we have mental health services there. So they're trauma informed. We have therapists and counselors. So, you know, sometimes we have a kiddo that it just, them telling us a story and what happened to them, they immediately go into crisis. So what do you do with that information? So we have personnel in our building that are ready to respond to that very quickly too. Yeah. So some of the services to kind of wrap it around, we have forensic interviews, we have family advocacy services. The other piece that I wanted to talk to you a little bit about too is a service, we have medical exams. And so those are very, also sometimes a lot of people don't know what that's like, but you know, if there's allegations of sexual abuse of a child, we are going to recommend that the child, you know, along with law enforcement and CPS, to have a medical exam done. And so we have, actually, we're growing. So you're going to be speaking to Rosa on the next one, and she'll talk to you a little bit more about that. But we have a couple nurses on site that can provide that exam to that child.
Oh, that's good. In that safe environment where they'll feel a little more comfortable.
Yeah. Oh, wow. And, you know, I mean, one of the things that we like to always say to, you know, we want families and our victims to feel safe and to try to keep them all in one place. It's very traumatic for them what they're going through. And so if we can just do that and bring everybody to us and the families there already, is less likely that they're having to be bounced from one organization to another.
Right, all over, because you don't know where they're coming from. What about, those are amazing services that you all provide for the victims. What about any services for their parents or their guardians, whoever you know, is in, whoever the child is in their care? Yeah, so one of the first things that we're going to identify very quickly with our partners is to make sure that that parent or caregiver is a protective caregiver, because that's, I mean, right off the start, we need to make sure somebody's going to be able to be protective for that child, because the mental health services that we can provide, whether it is individual counseling or group counseling or parent counseling, that's that healing piece that we are going to start working with the family and providing them with coping skills. It is something that is not going to happen overnight. Where the type of therapy that we have is trauma informed, meaning that because the kiddos, more than likely the ones that are coming to the CAC, have experienced extreme trauma. So they're all equipped to understand what that it's like and to really help that family in that healing process. For the most part too, it could be a year in counseling, 2 years. And it's beautiful to see them, you know, from when they were at the beginning with a forensic interview, because, you know, even in a forensic interview, children are more than likely not, you know, they don't wake up that morning and saying, I'm going to tell everybody about what happened. They have a lot of things that they worry about, fear, the unknown, or what's going to happen to mom, or what's going to happen to dad, or whoever it is that is abusing them. You know, they have that bond with them. And so it's very hard for children to tell what's happened. And so we have to take baby steps with them sometimes. And maybe in the forensic interview, that's not where they felt safe to tell their story. But during counseling, you know, building that rapport with the therapist, that may give them, you know, more time to slowly disclose the abuse that has happened. Yeah, and every child is different. Every case is different. So that's for sure. What about, can you tell us some signs, some red flags to look out for if, for child abuse?
Yeah, so if we're talking about sexual abuse, that's usually the one that we see the most, you know, this is a kiddo that, you know, different ages have different signs, but if we're talking average, you know, an 8, 9, 12, 13-year-old kiddos coming into the CC, we always tell parents, you know, and when we talk to parents, they're very quick to tell us, oh, wow, I didn't see that red flag. So bedwetting, you know, when a child has already been potty trained and all of a sudden, you know, they're wetting their bed, medical situations that come up with these kiddos, sometimes, you know, infections and things like that, that may be, you know, something that's happening a lot where before it wasn't happening. Withdrawn, you know, if it's a child that was happy, you know, whether it was in school or not in school, but had that fun, energetic, to be playing outside, or to
Mhm.
be, with the family watching a movie, and all of a sudden they're very withdrawn. That's also a sign of that could be happening, that something's happened to that child when we're talking about sexual abuse. And some of the older kiddos, what we see, some of the signs is that
Mhm.
somebody that may be, just withdrawn in their appearance too, that it was someone that, just a few months ago, was vibrant, and their hygiene was something that they took very seriously, but it all of a sudden it kind of did a full 360. And now we're not wanting people to see us, we're covering our face with our hair, hats, those type of things, very, very withdrawn. Sometimes, parents can see where children start cutting, or they could
Yeah.
have maybe ideations, suicide, or talking about it that way. So there are some signs there. You can, we always tell parents, and even the community and family members, it's great to be able to just observe and listen to the child. And if you
Pay
see
attention.
anything that is not ordinary of their person, who once they were, is to definitely keep an eye on it. For physical abuse, that's a little bit, sometimes they're more present, some of the signs,
Mhm.
because you have
Right.
injuries, or a child that all of a sudden is now wearing long sleeves all the time, and it's 110 degrees outside. What are we
I've seen
looking
that.
at?
That's for
Yeah.
sure. Most
Are we
definitely.
covering bruises? Is it a child that's missing a lot of school because, they have a mark, and then the child's not going to go to school because the teacher is going to ask, tell me about that bruise on your face. And so you start seeing some of that also playing part in their education. They get withdrawn,
Mhm.
they perfect straight A student or AB student all of a sudden has no interest in school whatsoever, or being around friends. So yeah, so definitely some signs of abuse that you can kind of pick up on. Now because of the pandemic, that's one of the
Yeah.
things that we were kind of worried about, is how do we have eyes on these kiddos?
Most
Even as
definitely.
neighbors, yeah, even as neighbors and family members and things like that, you definitely, can pick up on some of those clues that maybe were not there before.
I'm so glad you gave us some of those that information. I know you all have a social media page. I've seen you all on. You have Facebook and Instagram. It has some great information. So I do hope that our audience here is able to follow you all. Just because even whatever fundraisers you'll have, or whatever's occurring, but also you'll have stats, and that's just, it's important to be aware of things like that. Why, Rosita, do you think that it's important not to stay silent?
Yeah, so,
As Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I know it's, and you hit it right there on the nose. Sexual abuse is something that was very secretly once, we were taught
Hmm.
very early on, and especially the culture that we live in. We were
Yeah.
taught, that's something you don't talk about. That's something that happens between families, or sometimes, religion has kind of been brought into the mix of things, but it
Uh-huh.
definitely can't be. It needs to be talked about, the signs of abuse, sexual abuse, and people need to have a conversation about it. It can be
I agree.
uncomfortable with parents talking to their children about their bodies, about community organizations, to hear some of the stuff that
Mhm.
we talk about here today that is happening to our children. But if
Yes.
not us, then who? And our children count on adults, for to be their eyes and ears. They're just, that's what they do. They look up to
Right.
adults. So if we stay silent, and maybe we think that something is just not happening, or we need all this information before reported, actually the law requires, especially folks that, with the profession as professors, teachers, nurses, doctors, they're called professional reporters for a reason. The
Hmm.
state of Texas knows that we have better understanding on what that is. If a child is being abused, or we just suspected, that we're in that
Hmm.
professional bucket. And so it's very important that that is reported. And one thing to always remember is you don't need to have all the facts in play. Because if we wait for all the facts to come to us, it may be too late for that child. Maybe have been abused, or unfortunately in the state of, in our Hidalgo County, we lost 8 children last year to abuse and neglect, and 1 in Starr County.
So awful.
So, report it. I've always
Report.
said that, please report it. Don't question yourself. If your gut is telling you something's there,
Mhm.
you've seen some signs, report it. Because remember, it's called suspected. It's not confirmed.
Exactly.
It's suspected abuse of a child.
And we're all trying to do our part.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. We're just trying to do our part, working together. Most definitely. Do you all do any presentations in the community for
Absolutely.
schools or other agencies? Okay.
Yep. Yep. And so we have the professional reporting that we can do that is mandated by a lot of organizations in the state of Texas,
Oh,
at
that's good to know.
schools and things like that. So we can definitely do one on that, and it explains the law a little bit more and who falls under
Mhm.
that professional reporting. How long do
Okay.
you have to report suspected
Oh, that's a
abuse of
good
a
one.
child?
Mhm.
So we have some of those, and then we also have the Darkness to Light program curriculum that we use in schools with
Oh.
children, and Play It Safe. So Play It Safe is more age appropriate for the younger kiddos about their body. As we get a
Oh,
little bit older, obviously we're not going to talk to a 15-year-old the same way we talk to a
to a
5-year-old, because
5-year-old.
they might
Yeah.
just kick us out. So we're trained
It's going
on
to be
making
hard
sure,
enough trying to talk to them.
right? Yeah.
Yes.
So we're very capable, and we are trained on how different age groups need to be, trained on this and taught, and, make it fun for some of the older kiddos and things like that, so
Mm.
we can keep them engaged.
Engaging. Oh,
Yeah.
great. Nice and engaged. We're on the same wavelength here.
Yeah.
How can we as a community help the CAC? How can we look, besides reporting or anything like that, what can we do?
Awareness reporting is
Okay.
our number 2, but we always want, in a situation, just doing this and allowing us this opportunity to be able to come and talk to you about the services that we provide. So if you do come in contact with someone, that
Mhm.
you have a little bit of knowledge on what it is. The CEC really is a safe place for families and children to come, and we provide that hope and that healing and that piece of justice that they need. So it's kind of like what we talked about. The other piece that I always enjoy is volunteering. We
Oh,
know
okay.
your organization at UTRGV is always, pushing for volunteering, and we've had wonderful groups coming in from you guys. In the past, we've done the softball tournament. Volunteering is a great way to give back to the CAC. We also
Okay.
have times where people do collect things for us.
I was just going to ask about donations.
Yeah,
Okay.
donations, obviously because of the pandemic, everything needs
Okay.
to be new and packaged. Well, food, it has to be, canned foods and things like that.
Okay.
The one thing to always remember is that our families are very vulnerable. It's a very vulnerable time for them. And usually
Yes.
98% of the folks that cause harm to children are within the family. The child knows, whether it's
Right.
mom, dad, uncle, stepdad, or stepmom. And so when we take that person out of the situation from their home, they're usually
Mhm.
left with one less income. And so clothing, school supplies, food,
Okay.
the holidays, a toy drive, any time of drive that you can think of that could help our families, we welcome it, and we'll coordinate everything for you. You just have to
Oh,
put
wonderful.
the stuff together for us.
There you go. Good.
Yeah.
No, that's really good to know, especially because of the pandemic. Some people, some agencies aren't taking donations, but some are just being very selective, and it's understandable. We're all trying to do our part to be safe.
Yeah.
That's awesome. We have some community resources up here on the slide. Of course, we always have, our shelters here locally in both counties, and then the Children's Advocacy Center phone number is right there. The other hotline numbers, the number for CPS to report abuse as well. And then there are also 2 other sites here at the bottom for kidslivessafe.com and the familywatchdog.us. And then we always incorporate our UTRGV resource page as well. Just so you all are aware of that. And before we finish up today, Rosita, is there anything you'd like to say before we end our conversation?
Just thank you very much for this opportunity. This is just amazing. For every chance we're able to come out to the communities and talk about this very important topic is another step forward. into
Oh,
hopefully one day not having any child abuse. So we're
amen.
going to get there.
Amen. Yes, we just thank you so much for joining us. Like I said, April is Child Abuse Awareness Month. We are very grateful that you were able to shed some light on your agency. If anybody has any comments or questions, please feel free to reach out to her agency, to myself at the Police Department, Victim Services, or to the OVAP office. Thank you so much for attending the Water Cooler Conversations, and we hope to see you in 2 weeks. Y'all be safe and take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.